Did you know that an entire empire, one that would eventually cover a quarter of the world's surface, began not with a king's ambition or a general's crusade, but with a craving for pepper? You are standing on the damp, cobbled docks of London. The year is 1600, and the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke, river mud, and distant opportunity. The price of a single sack of nutmeg could buy you a house, and a pocketful of cloves was worth more than a working man's yearly wage. These weren't just seasonings, they were the ultimate status symbols, the medicines, and the preservatives of their day, and they came from a world away, a world guarded by rival empires and treacherous seas. This is the story of how a small group of merchants, armed with a piece of paper from their queen, set out to get their share of the spice trade, and ended up accidentally conquering a subcontinent. Just before we dive in, please take a second to tap the like button and subscribe to the channel. It's the single best way to support our work and ensure you never miss a new story. We're always curious, so let us know in the comments what part of the world you're in and what time it is for you. Now, picture a room in London, not a grand hall in a palace, but likely a smoky tavern or a wood-paneled office. Around a heavy oak table, a group of men gather, their faces lit by candlelight. They are not lords or knights, but adventurers in commerce, men like Sir Thomas Roe, a veteran of trade and exploration. There are 218 of them in total, a consortium of investors pooling their resources, a concept we would now call crowdfunding, a startup. They have seen the vast fortunes made by the Portuguese and the Dutch, who control the sea lanes to the East Indies, the fabled Spice Islands. They have watched ships limp back to Lisbon and Amsterdam, their hulls heavy with fragrant wealth, and they want a piece of the action. They petition their queen, Elizabeth I, a monarch known for her shrewd pragmatism and her fondness for enterprises that might weaken her rivals, particularly the Spanish. On the very last day of the 16th century, December 31st, 1600, she grants their request. You can imagine the crisp parchment, the elaborate royal seal dangling from a ribbon. It is a royal charter, and it gives these men, now officially named the Governor and Company of Merchants of London trading into the East Indies, a 15-year monopoly on all English trade east of the Cape of Good Hope. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth foresaw the colossal entity she was creating, or if she simply saw it as a low-risk venture to fill the royal coffers and irritate her European competitors. The charter itself was a license to gamble, a permission slip for a long and dangerous voyage into the unknown. It wasn't a plan for an empire, it was a business plan, written not in the language of conquest, but in the cold, hard calculus of profit and loss, risk and reward. The first ships were already being prepared, small, sturdy vessels that would have to face not only storms and starvation, but the cannons of those who had gotten there first. You are now on the deck of one of those first ships, perhaps the Red Dragon, its timbers groaning with every swell of the cold Atlantic. The dream of pepper and cloves is a distant warmth against the reality of the journey. The voyage is a trial by water and time, a 9-month ordeal where stale biscuit and salted meat are the daily fare, and the spectre of scurvy, the dreaded disease of vitamin deficiency, haunts every sailor. You sail past the coast of Africa, round the treacherous Cape of Good Hope, and finally enter the Indian Ocean, a vast blue expanse that is anything but empty. This is not an undiscovered paradise, it is a fiercely contested marketplace. The first challenge comes from the Portuguese. They were the pioneers, the ones who first charted these sea routes a century earlier. Their stone fortresses guard key trading posts, and their formidable carracks, large sailing ships bristling with cannons, patrol the waters. They see you not as a fellow European, but as a heretical intruder, an interloper trying to steal a share of a trade they consider theirs by papal decree and right of discovery. But the Portuguese are the old guard, a fading power. The real threat, the one that keeps your captain awake at night, is the Dutch. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, is everything your English company is, but bigger, richer, and far more ruthless. It's like a scrappy startup going head-to-head with a global tech giant. The VOC has more ships, more guns, more money, and a single-minded focus on monopoly. They don't just want to trade, they want to own the trade, to lock it down completely. They have established their headquarters in Batavia, modern-day Jakarta, and are systematically pushing everyone else out of the most valuable prize of all, the Spice Islands, now part of Indonesia. This is where the world's entire supply of nutmeg and cloves grew, and the Dutch intended to keep it that way. When your ships arrive, you find that the best harbors are taken. The most valuable spices are under Dutch control, and their warships shadow your every move. The competition turns from tense standoffs to open violence. A flashpoint comes in 1623, a name that would be whispered with bitterness in London for decades. Amboina, on a small island in the Moluccas. The Dutch accuse a handful of English merchants of plotting a conspiracy against them. The evidence is flimsy, likely non-existent, but it is enough. The English traders are arrested, tortured in horrific ways, and then publicly executed. The Amboina massacre, as it became known, was a brutal message. It effectively slammed the door to the Spice Islands in the face of the English company. They were comprehensively beaten. Historians still argue about what happened next. Was it a stroke of genius, a clever strategic pivot, or was it simply a move born of desperation? Having been bloodied and ejected from the most lucrative part of the East, the company turned its gaze to what seemed like a consolation prize: the vast, complex, and politically fragmented coastline of India. It was a land not of rare spices, but of textiles, cottons, and silks. It seemed less profitable, but perhaps, just perhaps, less contested. Having been effectively bullied out of the Spice Islands, you find your ship sailing towards the western coast of India. The air changes. The scent is no longer just of cloves and nutmeg, but of dust, monsoon rain, and a million people. This is a different world entirely. You are not approaching small, isolated islands that can be seized or dominated. You are approaching the shores of a vast and ancient land, governed by one of the most powerful and sophisticated empires on earth, the Mughal Empire. To put it in modern terms, you've been kicked out of a niche luxury market and are now trying to set up a small kiosk in a continental superpower. At this time, in the early 17th century, the Mughal Empire is at its peak. It is a sprawling territory of immense wealth, ruled from magnificent courts in cities like Agra and Delhi. The Emperor Jahangir, a man with a passion for art, science, and jewels, presides over a population of over 100 million people. His armies are vast, his palaces are legendary, and his treasury overflows with gold and gems. Your company is, to him, a minor curiosity. To get permission to trade here, you can't just show up with guns. You have to bow, to petition, to engage in the delicate and often frustrating dance of diplomacy. The first Englishman to attempt this is a bluff sea captain named William Hawkins, who arrives at the port of Surat in 1608. He makes the arduous overland journey to the imperial court at Agra. He manages to get an audience with Emperor Jahangir, partly because he can speak some Turkish, a language of the court. He even becomes a temporary favorite, drinking with the emperor and receiving a generous salary. But the Portuguese Jesuits and merchants already at court work constantly to undermine him, whispering poison in the emperor's ear. After 3 years, Hawkins leaves empty-handed, with no formal trading agreement. The company realizes it needs a different approach. A captain is not enough. They need a proper ambassador. So, they send Sir Thomas Roe in 1615. Roe is a polished courtier, an experienced diplomat who understands the nuances of power. His mission is to secure a formal treaty, a legal document that would guarantee the company's right to trade. For 4 years, he follows the mobile Mughal court across northern India, a city of tents that moves with the emperor. He presents gifts, English paintings, a fancy European carriage, and even some surprisingly popular English mastiffs. But he finds the process maddening. The emperor is willing to grant favors, but the idea of a binding treaty with a small trading company is almost insulting to him. Jahangir sees the English as humble supplicants, not as equals. Roe's diaries are filled with his frustrations, complaining about the court's elaborate, time-consuming etiquette and the emperor's whims. There's a quiet debate among historians about Roe's ultimate success. He failed to get the grand treaty he wanted, but he did succeed in securing a crucial imperial decree, a firman. This decree granted the English the right to reside in and build a trading post, or factory, in the bustling port city of Surat. It was a toehold, a small but permanent commercial base on the edge of a colossal empire. The term factory is misleading. It wasn't a place of manufacture. It was a walled compound containing warehouses for goods, offices for accounting, and living quarters for the company's agents, the factors. It was an English island in a sea of Indian commerce, the first tiny seed of a future empire, planted not by a sword, but by a diplomat's patient, grinding persistence. You are standing inside the high walls of the Surat factory, a haven of English order amidst the chaotic vibrancy of the Indian port city. The air inside the main warehouse is a strange and intoxicating cocktail of smells. It is here that the true purpose of this entire venture is laid bare, stacked in bales, barrels, and sacks. This is the cargo that will make the perilous 9-month journey back to London, the goods that will, hopefully, turn a profit for the investors back home. Your eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The first thing you notice are the textiles. Before this, England was a land of wool, heavy and drab. India, however, was the world's master of cotton. You run your hand over a bale of calico, a relatively cheap, brightly printed cotton cloth. It's light, breathable, and colorful, a revolution for ordinary people's clothing back in Britain. It would become so popular that English wool weavers would later riot, demanding it be banned. Then you move to the more luxurious fabrics. You see bolts of muslin from Bengal, so fine and translucent that it was known as woven air. A story, perhaps apocryphal, tells of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb scolding his daughter for appearing in public almost naked, to which she replied she was wearing 7 layers of muslin. Beside it are shimmering silks, dyed in colors you've never seen before, rich crimsons and deep indigo. The source of that brilliant blue is in another part of the warehouse, large cakes of dried indigo, a plant dye that produced a color fastness and vibrancy that European dyes simply couldn't match. It was a messy, smelly business to produce, but the result was pure, marketable color. Of course, there are still spices. While the Dutch controlled the nutmeg and cloves, India offered a wealth of others. You can smell the sharp, earthy scent of black pepper, the black gold that started this all. There are also sacks of pungent ginger, aromatic cardamom, and cinnamon. These were the more common spices, but still fantastically profitable in Europe. But then you see the least glamorous, and yet perhaps the most important, commodity of all. In a dry, secure corner of the warehouse are barrels filled with a coarse, whitish powder. It looks like crude salt, and it has a faint, sharp smell. This is saltpeter, or potassium nitrate. To the merchants, it was just another item on the ledger, bought cheaply in India and sold for a good price in Europe. But saltpeter had one incredibly important use. It was the principal ingredient in gunpowder. Gunpowder is roughly 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur. England had sources of charcoal and sulfur, but its domestic supply of saltpeter was poor and unreliable. India, however, had it in abundance. Every barrel of this unassuming substance shipped back to London was another barrel of potential military power for the English state. Historians point to this as a crucial early link between the company's commercial activities and the military might of the nation. Without knowing it, by securing a stable supply of Indian saltpeter, the company was fueling the very cannons and muskets that would one day protect its ships and, eventually, conquer the land it was trading with. The cargo was a mix of the beautiful, the flavorful, and the deadly. You are now one of them. a young man who has signed his future away for a chance at fortune. Perhaps you are a writer, the lowest rung on the company ladder, so named because your primary job is to spend endless hours with a quill pen, copying ledgers and letters in the sweltering heat of the counting house. You have left behind the cool, green familiarity of England for this walled compound in your life is a strange mix of the profoundly dull and the intensely dangerous. The promise that lured you here was not the meager official salary, which was barely enough to live on. The real prize was the right to private trade. While the company held the monopoly on the main voyage back to Europe, its employees were permitted to trade on their own account between ports in Asia. You could buy cotton in Surat, sail it to Persia to trade for silk, and then trade that silk for spices in the Indonesian archipelago. It was a complex, risky business, but if you were smart, lucky, and ruthless, you could build a personal fortune beyond your wildest dreams. But the price of this opportunity was steep, and it was paid in health and years. The biggest enemy was not a rival trader or a pirate, but the environment itself. To the English, India was a graveyard. Diseases they had no name for and no cure for, like malaria, typhoid, and cholera, were rampant. The bloody flux, a violent form of dysentery, could carry a man off in days. The mortality rate was staggering. It was often said that 2 monsoons were the lifespan of a European in India. Young men would write cheerful letters home after arriving, only for their next correspondence to be a formal notice of their death, their meager possessions auctioned off to their colleagues. You live with the constant, quiet fear of a sudden fever, a fear you numb with copious amounts of alcohol, particularly strong Madeira wine and arrack, a potent local spirit. Beyond the physical danger was a profound sense of isolation. You were thousands of miles from everyone you have ever known. A letter to your family in England would take nearly a year to receive a reply, by which time everything could have changed. Your world shrinks to the confines of the factory walls, a small, often quarrelsome community of fellow Englishmen. Boredom is a physical presence, a weight you carry through the long, humid afternoons. The company officially forbade its employees from marrying local women, but in reality, relationships were common, creating a complex social world that was neither fully English nor fully Indian. Some historians argue this period saw the birth of a unique Anglo-Indian culture, as men adopted local dress, food, and customs simply to survive and stay sane. Others point out the exploitative nature of many of these arrangements. You would see senior merchants, men who had survived, living in incredible luxury, with dozens of servants, eating lavish multi-course English meals in the oppressive heat, a strange performance of a life they had left behind. This isolated, high-risk environment bred a certain type of man, one who was a gambler by nature, hardened to loss, and operating far from the moral and legal constraints of his home society. These were the men who, when the time came, would have no qualms about picking up a sword to protect their investments. Your life inside the factory walls, once a bastion against the unknown, begins to feel less like a fortress and more like a cage. The world outside is changing, and the change is violent. The great Mughal Empire, which had provided a stable, overarching political structure for 2 centuries, is crumbling. The death of the powerful Emperor Aurangzeb in 1707 created a power vacuum, and nature, especially political nature, abhors a vacuum. The empire begins to fracture into competing successor states, ruled by ambitious governors, or Nabobs, who pay lip service to the distant emperor in Delhi, but are effectively independent kings. Riding out from the Deccan Plateau, the formidable Maratha Confederacy, a Hindu warrior power, launches devastating raids across the subcontinent, extracting tribute and challenging anyone in their path. The order that Sir Thomas Roe had so carefully navigated is gone, replaced by a chaotic patchwork of shifting alliances and local wars. In this new, dangerous environment, your trading post, once protected by imperial decree, is now just a tempting target. It is a warehouse filled with immense wealth, sitting in the middle of a war zone. You can no longer rely on a piece of paper from a distant, powerless emperor to protect you. A fundamental shift in thinking begins to take place, not in the boardrooms of London, but in the sweltering heat of Surat, Madras, and a new swampy settlement called Calcutta. The question is no longer just about profit margins, it's about survival. The initial solution is simple and defensive. The company hires local guards, often called peons, armed with swords and old muskets, to man the walls. Think of it as a modern corporation hiring a security team for its headquarters. It's a necessary business expense, but then the competition escalates, driven by your old rivals, the French. The French East India Company, backed more directly by its own crown, also has forts and trading posts, and they have soldiers. The Anglo-French rivalry, a constant feature of European politics, spills over into India. Suddenly, your commercial competitor is not just trying to outbid you for silks. They are building better forts and training their own Indian soldiers, called sepoys. This creates an arms race. To protect its investments, the English company realizes it has to do the same. It begins to recruit its own army. It brings in professional officers from Britain, men who couldn't get a good commission in the regular British army, and saw the company as a place for adventure and rapid promotion. Under their command, the company recruits thousands of local Indian soldiers, the sepoys. They are given European-style uniforms, drilled with modern discipline, and armed with the latest muskets and bayonets, the very weapons made possible by the saltpeter in your warehouses. Historians debate whether this militarization was a grand, premeditated plan or a slow, reactive creep. The evidence strongly suggests the latter. It was an incremental process, a response to threats, but at some point a profound change occurs. The army, created to defend the ledgers, becomes a tool to expand them. A governor on the ground realizes that with a disciplined private army, you don't have to politely ask a local ruler for trading rights. You can demand them. You can intimidate him into giving you a monopoly. You can even intervene in his local succession disputes, backing one candidate for the throne in exchange for vast financial and territorial rewards. The bayonet, it turns out, could be far more profitable than the ledger. The company was morphing into something new and strange, a hybrid entity that was part corporation, part state, a commercial enterprise with the power to wage war. The line had been crossed, and the era of the merchant adventurer was giving way to the era of the company soldier. You are now in Bengal, the richest province of the decaying Mughal Empire. It is the mid-18th century, and the company's trading post at Calcutta has grown into a significant and fortified town. But there is a new Nawab of Bengal, a young, headstrong ruler named Siraj-ud-Dowlah. He is deeply suspicious of the British, and with good reason. He sees them strengthening their fortifications without his permission, abusing their trading privileges, and giving refuge to his enemies. He sees them not as humble merchants, but as a threat to his sovereignty. In 1756, he acts decisively. He marches on Calcutta with a huge army, and the British garrison, caught unprepared, is quickly overwhelmed. The city falls. Those who don't escape are imprisoned in a small guardroom that would become infamous in British history as the Black Hole of Calcutta. The exaggerated, propagandized story of this event would galvanize British public opinion, but at the time, it was simply a humiliating defeat. The news reaches the company's settlement in Madras, far to the south. A decision must be made. Do they cut their losses in Bengal, or do they fight back? They choose to fight. A relief force is assembled and sent by sea, and at its head is a man who would come to define the company's transformation from trader to conqueror, Robert Clive. Clive is a complex and controversial figure. He had started as a lowly writer, a moody and difficult young man who had once tried to take his own life out of boredom and despair. But he had found his true calling in the company's army, proving to be a natural and audacious military leader. He was ambitious, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. Clive retakes Calcutta with ease, but he isn't satisfied. He wants to remove Siraj-ud-Dowlah from power and replace him with a puppet ruler who will serve the company's interests. He finds his man in a disgruntled general from the Nawab's army, a nobleman named Mir Jafar. Clive enters into a secret conspiracy with Mir Jafar. The deal is simple. During the next battle, Mir Jafar will betray his master and bring his section of the army over to the British side. In return, the company will make him the new Nawab of Bengal, and he will reward them with immense wealth and trading privileges. This leads to the showdown in June 1757 at a mango grove near a small village called Plassey. On paper, it is a ridiculous mismatch. Clive commands a tiny army of about 800 Europeans and 2,200 Indian sepoys. Siraj Daulat's army numbers close to 50,000 men with heavy cavalry and a powerful artillery train, manned by French mercenaries. It should have been a slaughter, but Clive has his secret weapon, treachery. The battle begins, and for a while it seems the sheer weight of the Nawab's numbers will prevail. A sudden torrential monsoon downpour soaks the battlefield. The British, ever diligent, had protected their gunpowder with tarpaulins. The Nawab's army had not. Their gunpowder is ruined, their cannons fall silent. At this crucial moment, Clive gives the order to advance. And then, as planned, Mir Jafar and his large contingent of soldiers stand idle, refusing to fight for their Nawab. Other commanders follow his lead. The Nawab's army, seeing this betrayal and panicked by the disciplined British advance, breaks and flees. The battle is over in a matter of hours. Historians point out that Plassey was less a battle and more a transaction, a business deal sealed with a cannon volley. The casualties were incredibly light on the British side. Siraj Daulat was captured and executed, and Mir Jafar was placed on the throne of Bengal. The gamble, a breathtaking mix of military nerve and cynical conspiracy, had paid off beyond anyone's wildest dreams. A private company had just overthrown the ruler of a province richer and more populous than Britain itself. You see the immediate results of Plassey, and they are messy. Mir Jafar sits on the throne of Bengal, but he is a king in name only. He is a puppet, and his strings are pulled by Robert Clive and the company council in Calcutta. His primary function is to pay for the company's military expenses, pay for the trading privileges he granted, and pay enormous gifts and bribes to the company officials who put him there. He is, in effect, a human ATM machine for the company, and the treasury of Bengal is being drained at an alarming rate. When Mir Jafar can no longer meet the ever-increasing demands, the company simply removes him and installs his son-in-law Mir Qasim. When Mir Qasim tries to assert some genuine authority and limit the company's abuses, he too is overthrown in a short, bloody war, and a humbled Mir Jafar is put back on the throne. This game of installing and deposing puppets is chaotic and inefficient. It creates instability, and instability is bad for business. Robert Clive, returning to India in 1765 for his second term as governor of Bengal, sees this clearly. He realizes that controlling a puppet is not enough. The company needs to become the power behind the throne, formally and legally. He devises a masterstroke, a political solution of cynical genius. He goes over the head of the local Nawab and seeks out the source of all theoretical authority in India, the Mughal Emperor himself. The Emperor, Shah Alam II, is a tragic figure. His empire has crumbled, his capital has been sacked, and he is now a wanderer, a king without a kingdom, living under the protection of a local ruler. He has immense prestige, but no real power. Clive recognizes that the emperor's signature, his imperial seal, is still the most valuable legal instrument in the land. In August 1765, on a dusty plain near the city of Allahabad, a bizarre and pivotal scene unfolds. The mighty Mughal emperor, descendant of Akbar and Genghis Khan, is seated not in his magnificent palace in Delhi, but on a makeshift throne set up for him inside Robert Clive's command tent. Some accounts even suggest the throne was Clive's own dining table, draped with embroidered cloths. There, the powerless emperor formally grants the British East India Company the Diwani of Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. The Diwani was the imperial right to collect the revenues, the taxes, from these lands. On the surface, it was an administrative arrangement. The company would collect the taxes, keep a large portion to cover its expenses, and forward a smaller tribute to the emperor. In reality, it was a revolution. Historians agree this was the moment the company truly became a sovereign power. Before 1765, to buy Indian goods like textiles and tea, the company had to bring vast quantities of silver and gold from Britain, a constant drain on the British economy. Now, with the Diwani, they had achieved the ultimate corporate hack. They could collect taxes from the Indian people, use that money to buy Indian goods, ship those goods back to London, and sell them for a massive profit. The entire enterprise became self-financing. India's own wealth was now being used to buy its own exports, with all the profits flowing to London. The company was no longer a foreign merchant trading in Bengal. It was the financial master of Bengal. The ledger and the bayonet had now been joined by the tax roll, and a private company had formally taken control of the economy of a nation. The ink on that imperial decree, the Diwani, is barely dry, and a new kind of power settles over Bengal. It is the power of the accountant. You see the company's men, the writers and factors, hunched over their ledgers in the humid counting houses of Calcutta. Their world is one of columns and figures, of revenues projected and profits realized. They have been given the keys to the richest province in India, and their primary directive from the shareholders in London is simple: make it pay. They are merchants, not governors. They understand balance sheets, not agricultural cycles. They see the land and its people not as a society to be nurtured, but as an asset to be squeezed. The traditional system of Mughal tax collection, while often harsh, had a degree of flexibility. Local officials understood that a bad harvest meant taxes had to be lowered or forgiven, lest the farmers starve and the land become unproductive. There was an inbuilt, if self-interested, mechanism for survival. The company sweeps this away. They impose a rigid, centralized system with one goal: maximizing revenue. Then, in 1769, the rains fail. The monsoon, the lifeblood of the subcontinent, arrives late and leaves early. A second year of drought follows. The sky turns into a brassy, unforgiving shield. The rice paddies crack open like broken pottery, and the vibrant green of the landscape fades to a desperate, dusty brown. This was a natural disaster, a type of calamity that Bengal had faced before. But what came next was entirely man-made. As the harvest failed and food prices began to climb, the company's administration did the unthinkable. Faced with a drop in overall revenue because of the failed crops, they increased the land tax rate on the remaining farmers by 10% to ensure their profit targets for London were still met. It was a decision of such stunning callousness it is hard to comprehend. Worse still, the company's own English agents and their local collaborators saw the spreading hunger not as a crisis to be managed, but as a business opportunity. They used their power and capital to buy up whatever grain was available, creating local monopolies and hoarding rice. As scarcity turned to desperation, they sold this grain back to the starving population at prices 10, 20, even 50 times the normal rate. They became the worst kind of predators, feasting on the misery they were actively creating. The company even passed rules making it illegal for locals to hoard grain, a traditional survival strategy, effectively eliminating any competition for their own profiteering. You walk the dusty roads of a Bengali village in 1770. The silence is the most terrifying sound. The huts are empty. The looms where fine muslins were once woven are still. The fields are littered not with crops, but with the bodies of those who worked them. An estimated 10 million people, a third of the population of the region, perished from starvation and the disease that followed. It was one of the deadliest famines in human history. Historians still fiercely debate the nature of this crime. Was it a deliberate policy of extermination? No, the evidence doesn't support that. It was something perhaps more chilling, the logical, horrifying outcome of a system where human lives have no value on a corporate balance sheet. The Diwani had given the company the right to govern, and in its very first test, it had failed on a scale that staggered the imagination. You leave the haunted, silent fields of Bengal and travel back to Britain. The journey is the reverse of the one that brought young men out seeking their fortune. The ships now are heavy, not just with cotton and saltpeter, but with personal treasure chests filled with gold coins, diamonds, and pearls. The men on board are not the pale, hopeful youths who left years ago. They are sallow from tropical diseases, but their eyes gleam with a different kind of fever, one of avarice fulfilled. They have survived their 2 monsoons. They have played the game of private trade. They have profited from the Diwani, and some have even profited from the starvation of millions. They are returning home, unimaginably rich. When they step ashore in London or Bristol, they are a spectacle. You see one now, a man in his 40s, his skin permanently tanned by the Indian sun. He wears a silk waistcoat of a far more vibrant color than is fashionable in sober England, and perhaps a glittering diamond pin where a simple gentleman would have none. The British public, at first curious, soon becomes contemptuous. They give these men a nickname, a term dripping with sarcasm and scorn. They call them Nabobs, a mangled version of Nawab, the title of the Indian princes they had been manipulating and plundering. It was a way of saying their wealth was foreign, un-English, and almost certainly ill-gotten. The Nabobs, for their part, are desperate to be accepted by the very society that scorns them, and they believe they can by that acceptance. They go on a spending spree that shocks the nation. They buy vast country estates, sometimes outbidding ancient aristocratic families whose wealth was in land, not cash. They tear down old, drafty manor houses and build palatial new ones, filled with gaudy furniture and art. One famous nabob, Sir Francis Sykes, built a towering monument on his estate in Berkshire, a pointless folly just to show off his wealth. Their most disruptive act, however, is political. With their bottomless chests of Indian silver, they march into the countryside and buy up rotten boroughs. These were parliamentary constituencies with only a handful of voters, making it laughably easy for a rich man to simply buy the votes and purchase himself a seat in the House of Commons. Suddenly, the halls of Westminster, the heart of British governance, began to fill with these sunburned, fantastically wealthy men who owed their allegiance not to the king or a political party, but to the East India Company. They formed a powerful lobbying group, the India Interest, dedicated to protecting the company from any government interference. Historians still debate the true nature of the anti-Nabob backlash. Was it a genuine moral outrage at the corruption and exploitation in India, or was it simply the old, landed aristocracy panicking at the sight of this disruptive new money invading their exclusive club? The answer is likely a bit of both. The Nabob became a convenient villain, a symbol for everything that seemed wrong about Britain's burgeoning empire. They were the walking, talking proof that the pursuit of profit in a distant land was creating a monstrous entity that was now coming home to roost, its pockets full of gold and its morals nowhere to be seen. The scandal of the returning Nabobs and the horrifying reports of the Bengal famine create a storm in London. You can feel the shift in the political wind. The East India Company, once a source of national pride and profit, is now viewed with increasing suspicion and fear. It is a rogue elephant. It is a private corporation that has its own army, its own foreign policy, and a block of paid representatives in Parliament. It has plunged Britain into wars without the government's consent and brought the nation to the brink of moral disgrace. To many in London, it feels like the tail is wagging the dog. The government, led by Prime Minister Lord North, realizes something must be done. The company is too powerful to be ignored, but it is also, paradoxically, on the verge of bankruptcy. The costs of its constant wars and the rampant corruption of its officials have crippled it financially. In a moment of supreme irony, the company that was looting a subcontinent had to go to the British government and ask for a massive bailout loan to avoid collapse. This gives Lord North the leverage he needs. He agrees to the loan, but with strings attached, very big strings. This leads to the landmark legislation of 1773, The Regulating Act. You can picture the clerks in Westminster carefully writing out the clauses of a law designed to put a leash on a monster. It is the British state's first serious attempt to assert control over its overmighty corporate child. The Act is a compromise, a typically British, slightly messy solution. It doesn't nationalize the company. That would be too radical a step for the time. The company is allowed to keep its trading monopolies and its commercial functions. But the Act attacks its political power. It creates a new position, the Governor-General of Bengal, who will have authority over the company's other settlements in Madras and Bombay. This is an attempt to create a single point of accountability, to stop governors from launching wars on a whim. The first man appointed to this powerful new post is Warren Hastings. The Act also establishes a new Supreme Court in Calcutta, staffed by judges appointed by the Crown, not the company. This is meant to provide justice for British subjects in India and to curb the worst excesses of company officials. It's a direct response to the stories of Nabob corruption. Perhaps most importantly, the Act dictates that all of the company's political correspondence must now be submitted to the British government for review. The era of secrecy is over. For the first time, Parliament will have a window into what is actually being done in its name, thousands of miles away. Historians have long debated the effectiveness of the 1773 Act. Some see it as a weak and flawed piece of legislation, a halfway measure that created more conflict than it solved. The new Governor-General, Warren Hastings, would find himself in constant, bitter conflict with the members of his council, who were appointed to keep him in check. The new Supreme Court would clash with the company's existing legal systems, creating jurisdictional chaos. But other historians argue that its symbolic importance was immense. It established a vital principle, that the company was not an independent state. It was a British entity, and it was ultimately accountable to the British Parliament. The leash was still long and unwieldy, but it was now attached. The slow, century-long process of bringing the company under government control had begun. You are now in the majestic, medieval grandeur of Westminster Hall in London. It is 1788, and the most sensational political trial of the century is about to begin. The man in the dock is Warren Hastings, the first Governor-General of Bengal, who has recently returned to Britain after a long and tumultuous tenure in India. He is not a flashy nabob. He is a serious, scholarly man who speaks Indian languages and has a genuine, if paternalistic, love for Indian culture. But to his enemies, he is the embodiment of the company's tyranny. A man who ruled with an iron fist, extorted money from Indian nobles, and waged unauthorized wars. The trial is a national spectacle, the hottest ticket in town. The galleries are packed with London's high society, lords and ladies, artists and writers, all eager to witness the drama. The prosecution is led by a group of parliamentarians who have made it their personal crusade to expose the company's crimes. Their leader is the brilliant orator and political philosopher, Edmund Burke. Burke is a man driven by a profound sense of moral outrage. He sees the company's actions in India not just as bad policy, but as a stain on the honor of the British nation. He has spent years collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing his case. When he rises to speak, his voice echoes through the ancient hall. He delivers a blistering 4-day-long opening speech, a masterpiece of rhetoric. He paints a picture of Hastings as a rapacious tyrant, a captain general of iniquity, who has ravaged a peaceful and ancient civilization. He accuses him of specific crimes, of renting out British troops to an Indian ruler to help him conquer a neighboring territory, and of using cruel methods to extort a fortune from the powerful Begums, the mother and grandmother of the Nawab of Oudh. The trial becomes a grand public debate about the very nature of empire. Is it possible to rule a foreign land justly, or is all empire inherently corrupting? Can British standards of morality and law be applied in a place as different and distant as India? Hastings' defense is that he did what was necessary to save British India. He argues that he was surrounded by enemies, both Indian and European, and that he had to be firm, even ruthless. to protect the company's interests. He claims that the Asiatic character of the people required a more authoritarian style of rule, an argument that horrifies Burke. The trial drags on for an incredible 7 years. The initial public fascination wanes, the complexities of Indian politics and finance proving too tedious for most spectators. Witnesses die, evidence grows stale, and the political mood of the country shifts. The French Revolution erupts across the Channel, and the fear of radical change at home makes the British establishment rally around figures of authority, like Hastings. In the end, after one of the longest and most expensive trials in British history, Warren Hastings is acquitted on all charges. He is financially ruined by his legal fees, but politically vindicated. The result is a bitter blow to Edmund Burke. Historians still argue about the verdict. Some believe Hastings was a scapegoat, unfairly targeted for policies that were standard practice for the company at the time. Others maintain that while he may have been legally acquitted, he was morally guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors. The true significance of the trial, however, lies not in its outcome, but in the fact that it happened at all. The fact that the most powerful British official in India could be brought before Parliament and forced to account for his actions was a monumental step. It sent a clear message to all future Governor-Generals: you are being watched. The leash, first attached by the Regulating Act, was being pulled tighter. While men in powdered wigs debated morality in London, a very different kind of conflict was raging in southern India. The company's relentless expansion from its bases in Madras and Bengal was not going unopposed. It was not a simple case of a modern army rolling over primitive forces. In the southern kingdom of Mysore, the British met their match. You are now in the court of Mysore's ruler, Tipu Sultan. It is a vibrant, sophisticated center of power. Tipu is not some crumbling Mughal remnant or a pliable Nawab. He is an innovator, a modernizer, and a fierce, implacable enemy of the British. He has seen what the company has done in Bengal, and he is determined that Mysore will not suffer the same fate. He calls himself the Tiger of Mysore, and he has cultivated a personal brand centered on this powerful predator, a symbol of his ferocity and independence. His soldiers' uniforms have tiger-stripe patterns, his cannons are decorated with snarling tiger heads, and his magnificent throne is a life-sized golden tiger with crystal teeth. Tipu understands that to fight the Europeans, you must adopt and improve upon their technology. He builds a modern army, drilled and disciplined by French advisors. He creates a state-run trading company to compete with the British economically. He even experiments with a new calendar and new currency to assert his kingdom's unique identity. But his most famous and feared innovation is in rocketry. Rockets had been used in Indian warfare for centuries, but they were typically simple, unreliable bamboo tubes. Tipu and his father, Hyder Ali, transformed them into a genuine weapon of war. They created the first iron-cased rockets, which allowed for a much greater chamber pressure and thus a much longer range, up to 1.5 miles. These were not just fireworks, they were weapons of terror. You are with a unit of British and sepoy soldiers marching in tight formation across a field. Suddenly, a strange hissing sound fills the air. You look up and see dozens of fiery projectiles arcing across the sky. They are not cannonballs, they are erratic and unpredictable. Some are fitted with long sword blades that spin wildly as they fly, designed to scythe through infantry ranks. Others are designed to explode on impact, showering the ground with shrapnel. They don't have the accuracy of a cannon, but their psychological effect is immense. They create chaos and panic, breaking up the disciplined formations that were the key to British military success. The British are both terrified and deeply impressed by this technology. An eccentric fun fact is that after the British finally defeated Tipu, they shipped captured Mysorean rockets back to England. There, they were studied by an inventor named William Congreve, who reverse-engineered and improved them, creating the Congreve rocket. These were the very same rockets that would later be used by the British against the key Americans in the War of 1812, immortalized in the American national anthem as the rocket's red glare. The Anglo-Mysore Wars were a series of 4 brutal conflicts that spanned 3 decades. They were not easy victories for the company. Tipu Sultan proved to be a brilliant and resilient commander. He inflicted several humiliating defeats on the British, but the company had deeper pockets and a seemingly endless supply of men. They formed alliances with Tipu's neighbors, the Marathas, and the Nizam of Hyderabad, encircling him. In 1799, in the fourth and final war, a massive British-led army laid siege to Tipu's capital city, Seringapatam. After a fierce battle, the walls were breached, and in the desperate fighting that followed, the Tiger of Mysore was killed. His death removed the most formidable opponent to British expansion in southern India. The kingdom that had defied the company for so long was now broken, its treasures looted, and its territory divided. The roar of the tiger was silenced. You are a young man in a village in the Gangetic Plain, a region now called Awadh. Your life, like your father's and his father's before him, is tied to the rhythm of the seasons and the whims of the local tax collector. But the old certainties are gone. The land is torn by small wars, raids, and the demands of petty warlords. Then one day, a man arrives in your village. He is not a warlord. He is an Indian officer, a Sabidar, but he wears the uniform of the British East India Company. He is accompanied by a British officer, a young man not much older than you, with a sunburned face and an air of confidence. They are not here to take, they are here to offer. They are recruiting for the company's army. They offer something your father never had, something that seems like a dream in these chaotic times: regular pay, a fixed salary, paid in reliable silver rupees, on time, every month. They offer a pension, a uniform, and a status that lifts you above the endless struggle of the land. This is how the company built its incredible private army. It wasn't through conscription or force, but through a very attractive job offer. For countless young Indian men, mostly caste Hindus from agricultural communities, joining the company's army was the best career path available. You take the offer. You leave your village and are marched to a cantonment, a military town. There, you are transformed. Your hair is cut. Your traditional clothes are replaced with the iconic red coat, the stiff wool, unfamiliar against your skin. You are handed a brown Bess musket, a heavy, powerful weapon. You are drilled relentlessly under the hot sun by British sergeants who shout in a strange language, their commands echoed by your own Indian officers. You learn to stand in formation, to load and fire in unison, to march for miles without breaking step. You become a sepoy, from the Persian word sipahi, meaning soldier. A complex new identity is forged in you. You are an Indian, but you serve a foreign corporation. You are a Hindu, but your commanders are Christians. Historians have endlessly debated the psychology of the sepoy. How could they fight so effectively for their colonial masters, often against other Indian rulers? The key is to understand that the modern idea of India as a single nation did not exist yet. Your loyalty was not to a flag you had never seen, but to the things you knew. Your primary loyalty was to your Polton, your regiment. This became your new family, your new tribe. You fought alongside men from your own region, who spoke your language and understood your customs. Your second loyalty was to the company itself, the Company Bahadur, the brave company, which fed you, paid you, and gave you honor. And finally, a strange paternalistic loyalty developed towards your British officers. The ideal officer was expected to be a father figure to his men, a concept known as Mobob, or mother-father. He was supposed to know their names, mediate their disputes, and look after their welfare. This system, this delicate pact, was the bedrock of British power in India. By the start of the 19th century, the company's army had grown to nearly 200,000 men, making it one of the largest standing armies in the world, and it was composed almost entirely of Indian soldiers, commanded by a thin layer of white officers. It was a machine of conquest, powered by Indian muscle and paid for by Indian taxes, all for the benefit of British shareholders. It was an army in foreign pay, the ultimate tool of corporate power. but it was built on a foundation of trust and respect for religious and cultural traditions. It was an astonishingly effective system, but it was also a deeply fragile one. If that trust were ever to be broken, the consequences would be catastrophic. The great wars of conquest, the ones that pit huge armies against each other in dramatic set-piece battles, are becoming less frequent. The company's military machine is now so dominant that most remaining Indian rulers know that open defiance is suicide. The age of the soldier is giving way to the age of the administrator. You are no longer on a battlefield, but in a quiet, sun-drenched office in Calcutta. The only sounds are the scratching of a quill pen on paper and the slow, rhythmic sweep of a hand-pulled fan, a punkah stirring the thick, humid air. The new weapon of empire is not the cannon, but the legal claw. The new strategy is not a flanking maneuver, but a carefully worded policy document. This new era of expansion is personified by a man named Lord Dalhousie, who becomes Governor-General in 1848. He is an energetic, driven, and profoundly arrogant Scottish aristocrat, a man who sees himself as a great modernizer. He looks at the map of India, a patchwork of red company territory, and the pinks and yellows of the remaining princely states, and he sees it as messy, inefficient, and in desperate need of a tidying up. To achieve this, he aggressively applies a policy that would become infamous, the doctrine of lapse. It sounded perfectly reasonable on paper, a dry piece of administrative law. It stated that if the ruler of a princely state that was a dependent vassal of the company died without a natural, biological male heir, his state would automatically be absorbed, or lapse, into British territory. The key, the truly cynical part of this doctrine, was the term natural heir. For centuries, it had been a deeply ingrained and perfectly legitimate custom in India for a ruler without a son to adopt an heir. This adopted son would have all the legal and spiritual rights of a biological child, ensuring the continuation of the dynasty. Dalhousie's doctrine simply declared this ancient tradition invalid. It was a legal fiction, a rule invented by the British to give them a pretext for annexation. It was the political equivalent of finding a loophole in a contract to foreclose on a family home. One by one, ancient kingdoms began to disappear, swallowed by a pen stroke. The states of Satara, Nagpur, and Sambelpur were among the first to fall. Perhaps the most famous and consequential victim was the state of Jhansi. When its Raja died, the British refused to recognize his adopted son and annexed the kingdom. The Raja's widow, the formidable Rani Lakshmi Bai, would not forget this insult. She would later become one of the most iconic leaders of the Great Rebellion against the company. This policy created a profound sense of terror among the remaining Indian princes. Their titles, their histories, their very right to exist, now depended on the lottery of birth and the whims of a British official in Calcutta. And if the doctrine of lapsed didn't apply, Dalhousie found other reasons. In 1856, he annexed the huge and wealthy kingdom of Awadh, not because its ruler lacked an heir, but on the pretext of misgovernment. The British claimed they were stepping in to provide the people with a better, more efficient administration. Historians still debate Dalhousie's intentions. Was he a sincere reformer, a Victorian utilitarian who genuinely believed he was acting in India's best interests by imposing superior British rule? Or was he a ruthless imperialist, using any excuse he could find to expand British power and profits? The company was no longer just a kingdom maker, it was now a kingdom swallower, and its appetite seemed insatiable. The grand political schemes of men like Lord Dalhousie are not just lines drawn on a map. They have echoes that travel down from the marbled halls of Calcutta into the heart of every village. You are walking through one such village in Bengal, a place that was once famous for its textiles. A generation ago, this place would have been alive with sound. The rhythmic clatter of 1,000 wooden shuttles flying back and forth on handlooms, a sound like a hard, constant rain. The air would have been vibrant with the smell of dyes, of indigo and turmeric and madder root. Now, a strange silence hangs heavy in the humid air, broken only by the buzzing of flies. You look inside the open doorways of the mud-walled huts. You see the looms, magnificent and complex contraptions of wood and string, but they are idle, shrouded in dust and cobwebs. The weavers, men whose families had practiced this intricate art for centuries, are gone, or they sit staring with empty hands. This silence is the sound of a deliberate economic revolution. For centuries, India was the textile workshop of the world. Its fabrics, from the cheap, cheerful calicos to the impossibly fine muslins, clothed people from East Africa to Southeast Asia. The East India Company was founded, in large part, to buy these very textiles and sell them for a fortune in Europe. But now, in the 19th century, something has changed fundamentally. The Industrial Revolution has exploded in Britain. In the grim, smoky cities of Manchester and Lancashire, great iron machines, the power loom and the spinning jenny, are churning out cotton cloth at a speed and a price that no human hand can possibly match. Britain no longer needs to buy finished textiles from India. It needs something else: raw cotton to feed its hungry machines, and a market to sell its finished products. And here is where the company's dual role as both merchant and government becomes a devastating weapon. A two-pronged attack begins. First, the British government imposes crippling tariffs on Indian textiles being imported into Britain, making them too expensive to compete. At the same time, the company government in India lowers or eliminates the import duties on British machine-made cloth coming into India. It is a one-way street masquerading as free trade. Suddenly, the Indian market is flooded with cheap, durable, if coarse, fabric from Manchester. The local weaver, with his handloom, cannot possibly compete. His exquisitely crafted cloth, which takes weeks to produce, is now more expensive than the imported alternative. His customers, the ordinary people of his own village, now buy the cheaper British cloth. His livelihood vanishes. There is a dark, though possibly apocryphal, legend from this period that tells of weavers in Bengal who, in their despair, cut off their own thumbs to avoid being forced to work for pitiful wages by the company. Historians debate whether this happened literally, but as a metaphor for the destruction of a craft, it is brutally effective. The result was a process that many call the deindustrialization of India. Millions of skilled artisans were thrown out of work and forced back onto the land, becoming landless laborers and putting immense pressure on an already strained agricultural system. The hands that once wove air were now forced to dig in the dirt for a pittance. India was being systematically transformed from the world's greatest producer of textiles into a captive market for British goods and a supplier of raw materials for British factories. The loom was ruined, and with it, a way of life. You must now leave the quiet despair of the Indian village and travel halfway across the world to the bustling, discontented ports of North America. It is 1773. The same year the Regulating Act was passed in London. The connection between the company's troubles in India and the brewing rebellion in America is not a coincidence. It is a direct chain of cause and effect, and it revolves around a single, humble leaf: tea. The East India Company had another hugely profitable monopoly: the monopoly on bringing Chinese tea to the British world. The British people, from duchesses to dock workers, had become pathologically addicted to it, but the company, as we know, was in deep financial trouble. Its wars and mismanagement had left it with crippling debts, and sitting in its warehouses in London was a colossal mountain of unsold tea, 17 million pounds of it, to be exact. The tea was going stale, and the company desperately needed to sell it to raise cash. The British government, led by Lord North, comes up with a plan that seems ingenious. It is called the Tea Act of 1773. The plan is designed to solve two problems at once. It will bail out the ailing East India Company, and it will also subtly assert Parliament's right to tax the American colonies, a point of bitter contention. The Act allows the company to do something it had never been allowed to do before: to ship its tea directly from China and India to the American colonies, bypassing the London auctions and middlemen. This would make the company's tea drastically cheaper than any other tea available in America, even cheaper than the smuggled Dutch tea that most colonists drank. The government's thinking was simple. Surely the colonists, who loved a bargain as much as anyone, would jump at the chance to buy cheap, legal tea. They would be happy to pay the very small, lingering townshend duty on it, and in doing so, they would implicitly accept Parliament's right to tax them. It was a catastrophic miscalculation of the American mood. You are standing on a wharf in Boston, and the salty air is thick with anger. For the colonists, this was not about the price of tea. It was about a fundamental principle: no taxation without representation. They saw the Tea Act not as a bargain, but as a Trojan horse. It was a clever trick to make them swallow a tax they had not consented to. They saw it as a corrupt bailout for a powerful, monopolistic corporation that was in bed with the government. The local colonial merchants who had been profiting from smuggling Dutch tea were, of course, furious at this new, subsidized competition. But the anger went far deeper. The East India Company itself was seen as a symbol of tyranny. The colonists had heard the stories coming out of India, of a private company with its own army, overthrowing princes and bleeding a country dry. They feared that if Parliament could grant a tea monopoly to the company in America, what was to stop it from granting other monopolies, or even giving the company the same kind of political power it wielded in Bengal? In December 1773, 3 ships laden with company tea, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, are moored in Boston Harbor. The colonists demand that the ships be sent back to England, but the royal governor refuses. On the night of December 16th, a group of men, members of the activist group, the Sons of Liberty, disguised themselves as Mohawk Indians. They board the 3 ships, and, in a silent, methodical act of political protest, they smash open 342 chests of tea and dump the entire cargo into the harbor. It was not a riot, it was a statement. The salt water of Boston Harbor was stained brown with the leaves that were supposed to save the East India Company. The company's financial crisis in India had now ignited a political firestorm in America. The ripples from that splash in Boston Harbor spread across the Atlantic and crash upon the shores of Britain. The reaction in London is not one of compromise, but of fury. The destruction of the tea is seen not as a protest, but as an act of vandalism and open rebellion. The British government and King George III feel they have been pushed too far. They are determined to make an example of Massachusetts and to crush this colonial defiance once and for all. Parliament passes a series of laws that the colonists will call the Intolerable Acts. The port of Boston is closed until the city pays for the destroyed tea. The colonial government of Massachusetts is dissolved and placed under direct military rule. British officials accused of crimes in America will now be sent to England for trial, where they are likely to be acquitted. The message is clear. The time for debate is over. This heavy-handed response backfires spectacularly. Instead of isolating Massachusetts, it unites the 13 colonies in opposition. They see the fate of Boston as a preview of what could happen to them. The simmering resentment boils over into armed conflict. In April 1775, the first shots are fired at Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. The American Revolutionary War has begun. You are now a British official in Whitehall, London, watching the war unfold from a distance. At first, there is a sense of confidence, even arrogance. How can a ragtag militia of farmers and merchants possibly stand against the disciplined redcoats of the most powerful army in the world? Britain has professional soldiers, a peerless navy, and a vast treasury. The rebellion will surely be crushed in a single campaign. But the war drags on. The American colonists, led by the stoic and resilient George Washington, proved to be a far tougher opponent than expected. They are fighting on their own ground, for their own homes and ideals. The sheer size of the American continent makes it impossible for the British Army to occupy and control effectively. It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. Then, in 1778, Britain's old rival, France, sees an opportunity to avenge its earlier defeats. The French enter the war on the American side, providing crucial money, supplies, and naval power. Spain and the Netherlands later join in, turning a colonial rebellion into a global war. Britain now finds itself isolated and fighting on multiple fronts, from the Caribbean to the coast of India. The decisive moment comes in 1781 at Yorktown, Virginia. A large British army, commanded by Lord Cornwallis, finds itself trapped. Washington's American forces block him on land, while the French fleet, in a rare moment of naval superiority, blockades the coast, preventing any escape or reinforcement by the Royal Navy. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrenders his entire army. The news of the defeat at Yorktown hits London like a physical blow. The will to continue the war collapses. It has been ruinously expensive in both blood and treasure. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris is signed, formally recognizing the independence of the United States of America. Britain has lost its most populous and prosperous colonies. A continent has slipped through its fingers. Historians view this as a pivotal moment, the end of the First British Empire, an empire based largely on Atlantic settlement. It is a national humiliation, a strategic catastrophe, and it forces a profound and urgent revaluation of where Britain's imperial future lies. The gaze of London, once fixed on the west, now turns with renewed, desperate focus to the east. You are in Leadenhall Street in London, standing before the headquarters of the East India Company. The mood inside, once panicked by the threat of bankruptcy, is now one of renewed purpose. The loss of America has changed everything. The British political and commercial establishment, reeling from its defeat, looks at the global map and sees one undeniable, glittering prize: India. If the American colonies were the cherished child that had run away from home, India was now the adopted heir who was expected to pay for the family's losses and restore its fortunes. The entire center of gravity of the British Empire begins to shift, tilting decisively from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean. India is no longer just a profitable trading venture. It is now seen as the indispensable foundation of British global power, the compensation for the loss of America. This pivot is formalized in 1784 with a new piece of legislation, Pitt's India Act, named after the young Prime Minister, William Pitt the Younger. It is a far more robust and effective piece of legislation than the old Regulating Act. The 1784 Act creates a new body in London called the Board of Control. Its members are appointed by the government, and they are given sweeping powers to supervise all of the East India Company's civil, military, and financial affairs. The company is still allowed to run the day-to-day administration in India and to hold its trading monopolies. But all major policy decisions must now be approved by the government through the Board of Control. This creates a system of dual control that would last for the next 70 years. The company rules, but the government oversees. The leash has been shortened and strengthened significantly. The British state has effectively taken over the company's empire, while leaving the company to manage the paperwork and pay the bills. With this new, more direct government backing, the pace of conquest and consolidation in India accelerates dramatically. The next Governor-General to arrive in India after the American War is Lord Cornwallis, the very same general who had surrendered at Yorktown. To him, the posting to India is a chance to redeem his reputation. He arrives with a mission to clean up the corruption of the Nabobs and to create a more stable, permanent system of British rule. He introduces sweeping reforms in the civil service and the legal system, attempting to build a proper colonial state. Following him are a series of aggressive and expansionist governor-generals, most notably Lord Wellesley. Wellesley abandons any pretense of the company being a mere trader. He openly declares his intention to make the British the paramount power in India. He fights and wins the final war against Mysore, defeats the powerful Maratha Confederacy in a series of major campaigns, and forces almost all remaining Indian princes to sign subsidiary alliances. These treaties turn them into client states. forced to pay for British troops stationed in their territory and to surrender control of their foreign policy. The loss of America had taught Britain a bitter lesson about settler colonies demanding political rights. India, it was decided, would be a different kind of empire, an empire of conquest, not of settlement. It would be ruled autocratically, its vast population governed by a tiny cadre of British officials, and its immense resources harnessed for the benefit of the British Crown. The jewel that had been lost in the West would be replaced by a new, far more magnificent jewel in the crown in the East. The company that had stumbled into politics was now the conscious instrument of a global imperial strategy, forged in the fires of a humiliating defeat. And so you stand, at the turn of the 19th century, looking back at the 200 years that have passed since that first charter was signed. It began so small, with a piece of parchment and a desire for pepper. It was a private venture, a startup company with 218 investors hoping for a decent return on their capital. You saw their first agents as humble supplicants at the court of the mighty Mughal Emperor, begging for the simple right to trade. He stood in their first factory, a tiny walled compound, a fragile island of commerce in a vast and ancient land. He smelled the cargo, the calico and the spices, and the unassuming saltpeter that would fuel the very guns that changed everything. Then you witnessed the slow, almost accidental transformation. You saw how the crumbling of an old empire created a vacuum, and how the company, to protect its profits, was forced to raise an army. You saw that army, once a simple security team, become a tool of breathtaking ambition in the hands of men like Robert Clive. You were there at Plassey, where a battle was won, not with superior valor, but with superior treachery, a business deal sealed with a cannon volley. You saw the true genius of the Diwani, the moment the company hacked the entire economy of a nation, using Indian taxes to buy Indian goods for British profit. You walked the silent, haunted villages of the Bengal famine, a horror born not of malice, but of the cold, inhuman logic of a balance sheet. You saw the scandalous Nabobs return home, their pockets stuffed with Indian wealth, a living testament to the corruption that this power had unleashed. And you saw the British state, slowly, reluctantly, and then with decisive force, begin to tame its monstrous corporate child, wrapping it in the legal chains of acts and boards of control. It was a story without a single, grand design. It was a slow creep, an evolution driven by greed, fear, ambition, and the relentless logic of the marketplace. The company did not set out to build an empire, it set out to build a business. But in doing so, it created something the world had never seen before, a private corporation that acted as a sovereign state, a kingdom of merchants whose soldiers conquered provinces and whose accountants deposed princes. The foundation of this new empire was unlike any that had come before it, and as the world turned, this strange corporate state, forged in the East, became the central pillar of Britain's global power, just as its older, more conventional empire was collapsing in the West. It was a pivot born of humiliation and necessity, and so, having lost a continent in the West, Britain turned its gaze to the East. There, a trading company was transforming into a kingdom maker, and the foundation of a new, global empire was being laid, not with the hands of soldiers, but with the signatures of merchants. And now, as our story of commerce and conquest comes to a close, you can let the details begin to soften and fade. The clamor of the London docks and the vibrant chaos of the Indian courts can recede into a gentle, quiet distance. The sharp edges of history can blur, leaving only the calm and the comfort of the present moment. You can feel the weight of the day lifting from your shoulders, like a heavy woolen coat being gently removed. The room around you is a safe and peaceful harbor, a quiet place far from the turbulent seas of the past. There is nothing more you need to learn tonight. Nothing you need to figure out. The only task that remains is to rest. Let your breathing become slow and steady, a gentle tide rising and falling in the stillness. Each breath in brings a sense of peace, and each breath out releases any lingering thoughts or worries. Imagine the story we have told as a book, its pages filled with the deeds of merchants and soldiers, and now you are softly closing that book and placing it on a nearby table. The story is finished for today, and it will wait for you. Your mind can grow quiet, like a calm and settled sea after a great voyage has ended. You are drifting now in a warm and comfortable current, moving gently toward a place of deep and restorative sleep. Allow the quiet to envelop you, a soft blanket of tranquility, as you drift peacefully into your dreams. The end. Sweet dreams.